Amid a whirlwind of accusations and public scrutiny, Barron Trump faces unimaginable challenges. Yet the way he has handled the situation has surprised everyone. Elysium's Voyager, a floating palace, sailed majestically across the tranquil waters of the Pacific. This was not just a cruise. It was an experience designed for those seeking luxury and tranquility, away from the chaos of everyday life. For Barron Trump, it was exactly what he needed. Sitting atop the ship, Barron leaned back from the polished rail, the salty breeze drying his hair. At over 6 feet tall, he had a quiet, composed presence, having grown into a man who preferred observation to spectacle. The distant horizon glowed with oranges and pinks, while the sun painted a dazzling scene that even the finest galleries could not rival. Beside him sat Isabel, her white hair catching the light like fire. She was not a face the tabloids would recognize, and that was intentional. Isabel was smart, reserved, and extremely self-effacing, a rare combination in Barron's world. She adjusted the hair on her neck, looking at him with an amused smile. "You're thinking too much," she insisted, slowly opening her arms. Barron turned to her, replying, "Just enjoying the moment." "You're trying to enjoy it," she corrected, her tone warm but knowing. "Big difference." He laughed slowly, the sound carried on the wind. Isabel wasn't wrong. Even in this luxurious escape, he couldn't completely tune out. Years of public scrutiny had taught him to be cautious, always aware of how one photo or comment could turn into weeks of news. The trip was Isabel's idea, a chance for them to step away from the spotlight and simply be themselves. For the first 2 days, it worked. They explored the ship like ordinary passengers, enjoying exquisite meals, interacting with other passengers, and gazing out at the seemingly endless ocean. At night, they sailed beneath a starry sky, finding peace in the quiet moments their busy lives rarely allowed. However, not all of the Elysium's passengers seemed enchanted by their presence. Barron noticed Captain Hargrove on several occasions, always watching. His bright, piercing eyes lingered for a long time. Hargrove was an imposing figure, tall and robust, with an authority that commanded respect. His uniform was impeccable, but his gaze carried something unexpected. "Did you notice him looking?" Barron asked Isabel one afternoon as they watched the sunset. "Who?" she asked, looking up from her book. "The captain," Barron replied, subtly pointing to the man near the bridge. Isabel followed his gaze. Hargrove was talking to a crew member, but he glanced over at them as Isabel watched. His expression was impassive, but his attention lingered for a long time before returning to the conversation. "He's probably just curious," Isabel said, trying to reassure him. "You're not exactly anonymous." Barron nodded but said nothing. He was used to being watched, but this felt different, as if he wasn't just being watched, but being evaluated. Later that night, as they enjoyed an opulent dinner, the captain made a brief appearance, stopping by the dining area to chat with the guests. When he reached their table, he paused, his eyes deepening slightly. "Are you enjoying your trip, Mr. Trump?" Hargrove asked, his tone polite but distant. "Yes, thank you," Barron replied, his voice measured. Hargrove looked at Isabel, and then back to Barron. "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do to make your dinner more memorable." With that, he turned and left, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Isabel gave Barron a questioning look, but he simply looked away, determined not to let the date ruin his night. For a while, it seemed like just an awkward moment, a risk for a man accustomed to commanding such an imposing ship. But deep down, Barron couldn't shake the uncertainty that nagged at him. The cruise promised sanctuary away from the public eye, but something about this journey felt different. And soon, they would realize how quickly a seemingly perfect getaway could take a dark and unexpected turn. The morning light spilled over Elysium's Voyager as it sailed across the open sea. The gentle rocking of the ship was barely perceptible. Passengers moved about the decks with an air of carefree ease, enjoying their morning coffee or relaxing on lounge chairs for a day of indulgence. Barron and Isabel strolled along the promenade, their eyes shaded by the sun and their spirits lifted by the ship's vibrant atmosphere. Breakfast at the Garden Bistro had become their favorite routine. Perched high atop the ship with panoramic ocean views, the bistro offered a sense of peaceful seclusion from the world. The tables were adorned with bright linens, and the soft murmur of silverware mingled with the sound of the waves lapping against the hull. Isabel sipped her fresh orange juice, her gaze flicking around the tables. Families laughed as they nibbled on bites of pancakes. An older man and a younger man read a newspaper, and waiters moved gracefully between the guests. It was the kind of scene you'd see on a postcard, perfectly serene. "You're smiling," Isabel teased, pulling away with an amused smile. Barron looked up from his plate, his lips quirking in a small smile. "Isn't that allowed?" he asked, his voice soft but affectionate. "It's just rare," she replied, her tone slow but caring. "Well, you seem happy," he said, leaning back in his chair as he let the moment pass. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "At least here, I'm not that guy from the news. Just me. See? I told you this trip would be good for you," Isabel said with a smile, taking a bite of toast. Behind the table, a group of children ran past, their laughter echoing through the air. Barron watched them with a smile, remembering simpler times, before his name had become synonymous with controversy and scrutiny. Yet even here, he felt a twinge of unease in the back of his mind. It wasn't just Captain Hargrove's demeanor that bothered him. It was how out of place he felt in the face of the ship's polished elegance. Hargrove had passed their table earlier, acknowledging them with a nod, but his eyes lingered on Barron for a second too long. It was as if the captain was trying to read him, trying to figure out something unknown. "Do you think he's always like this?" Barron suddenly asked. "Who?" Isabel replied, taking off her glasses. "The captain," Barron said, looking suddenly toward the bridge where Hargrove was talking to a crew member. Isabel followed his gaze. "He's probably just old-fashioned. You know, the kind of guy who's all about order and respect," she replied. "Maybe," Barron muttered, although he wasn't entirely convinced. As the day progressed, the ship came alive with activity. The ship's pool was alive with laughter and screams as children splashed in the water, while adults relaxed with ice-cold drinks in their hands. A jazz band played soft tunes near the store, creating a soundtrack of joy that seemed to dispel the passengers' worries. Barron and Isabel explored the decks, stopping to browse the ship's shop windows and admire the ocean views. Isabel found a delicate bracelet in a jewelry store, and Barron surprised her by purchasing it before she could protest. "Stop spoiling me," she exclaimed, though her smile forgave her glee. "It's not spoiling if you deserve it," he replied with a grin. As the evening drew to a close, anticipation for the ship's formal ball grew. Guests returned to their cabins to dress in their finest attire, eager for a night of glamour. Barron and Isabel joined in, taking their time getting ready. He chose a sleek navy suit, while she donned a flowing emerald gown that made her look like something out of a classic Hollywood film. The grand ballroom was a sight to behold, its high ceilings adorned with chandeliers that cast a warm golden light. A string quartet played softly in a corner as elegantly dressed guests sipped champagne and socialized. Barron and Isabel entered arm in arm, their presence attracting the subtle but noticeable attention of those present. "You're turning heads," Isabel said as they headed to the dance floor. "You too," Barron replied, slowly turning her around as they moved to the beat of the music. For a while, the weight of the outside world seemed to disappear. They laughed, they danced, and for the first time in a long time, Barron allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. Not everyone shared his joy, however. From a balcony above, Captain Hargrove watched silently. His eyes were shadowed by the dim light, and his hand rested on the railing, his fingers tapping in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His gaze was fixed on Barron, his expression impassive but tense. A waiter approached the captain, offering him a glass of champagne. Hargrove accepted, but his focus never wavered. "They always think they're above it all," he muttered under his breath, his words drowned out by the music below. Back on the dance floor, Barron and Isabel shared a quiet moment as the music faded. He looked into her eyes, his hand resting gently on her waist. "This is perfect," Isabel said softly. "It really is," Barron agreed. Even though Hargrove's presence and watchful eye threatened to disrupt their perfect evening, Barron was determined not to let it ruin their moment. However, as the night wore on, the cracks in the facade began to appear, and no one could have predicted the chaos that was about to unfold just beneath the surface. The grand ballroom of Elysium's Voyager was the epitome of elegance. Every detail, from the polished marble walls to the gilded finishes, exuded an opulence that made passengers feel as if they had been transported to another era. Classical music played in the background as guests enjoyed themselves, their laughter mingling with the soft clink of glasses. Barron and Isabel stood near the dance floor, chatting with a couple they had met earlier that day. Isabel's emerald gown shimmered in the soft lighting, catching admiring glances from more than one attendee. Barron, ever composed, wore his suit with understated elegance, and his reserved smiles put those around him at ease. As they spoke, the massive doors to the ballroom suddenly flew open with a force that silenced the room. The music stopped mid-note, and the collective sound of conversation gave way to a heavy, uncomfortable silence. All eyes turned to the source of the interruption. Captain Hargrove stood in the doorway, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His cap was missing, his normally impeccable uniform was slightly disheveled, and his face was flushed, either from anger or alcohol or both. In his right hand he held a half-empty glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swaying as he moved. "There he is," Hargrove shouted, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. His eyes narrowed on Barron, who instinctively straightened, his face taking on a wary expression. The captain's words hung in the air, thick with accusation. "The golden boy, hiding out here like he's just one of us," Hargrove continued, his tone dripping with disdain. He swayed slightly, pointing to the side of a table. The guests exchanged nervous glances, nervous laughter rippling through the crowd as Hargrove's words sank in. Barron felt Isabel's hand tighten on his arm, her tension radiating through her touch. "What's he doing?" Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. Barron didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the captain, studying him intently. This wasn't the calculated disdain of a man merely exerting his authority. It was personal. Hargrove began moving toward them, his steps heavy and unsteady. "You think you can just stride in here, moving like you own the place?" he growled. His voice rose with each step, his words slightly slurred. "You don't belong here. Not you, not your kind." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Some passengers gasped, while others looked at Barron, unsure of what to expect. "Captain," Barron said firmly, his voice calm but firm, "you've had too much to drink. This is neither the time nor the place." "Oh, it is the time," Hargrove replied, slamming his glass down on the table with a loud crack. "You think I don't know who you are? I know exactly who you are. I've spent years watching people like you, arrogant, taking what they want without a second thought for the rest of us." Barron didn't back down, though his chest felt tight. He'd faced public confrontations before, but this was different. This wasn't a reporter firing a tough question or a stranger taking pictures. This was pure, unfiltered hostility. "Look, I don't know what you think I did," Barron said, his tone firm but charged with authority. "But I'm not going to stand here and let you insult me or anyone else in this room." Hargrove laughed bitterly, the sound loud and harsh. "Oh, the prince speaks. How noble." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You don't belong here, and I'm not the only one who knows it." Isabel tugged on Barron's arm, her voice shaking. "Let's go. This isn't worth it." But Barron didn't move. He met Hargrove's gaze directly, his expression calm but firm. "Captain, I'm asking that you step aside and take some time to calm down. Anything that needs to be discussed, we can do it in private." "In private?" Hargrove called out, his voice rising again. "No, no more secrets. People need to know the truth about you and your family. They need to see who you really are." The whispers among the guests grew louder, the tension in the room building like an electric current. A crew member who had been standing near the entrance took a tentative step forward, his face pale. "Captain, perhaps we should go outside," he said cautiously, but Hargrove waved him off. "Don't tell me how to run my ship." He stepped away, his attention still fixed on Barron. "This isn't over, boy. Not by a long shot." Before the situation could escalate any further, two officers approached the captain, their movements deliberate but not confrontational. "Sir, we need to speak with you," one of them said calmly, placing a firm hand on Hargrove's shoulder. For a moment, it seemed as though Hargrove might resist, but then he gave in with a frustrated grunt, allowing the officers to guide him from the room. He cast one last glance at Barron, his eyes burning with rejection. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath before disappearing through the door. The ballroom remained silent for several moments, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Slowly, the music began again, but the festive atmosphere had disappeared. Conversations were hushed, the guests exchanging worried glances as they tried to process the scene. Barron exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned to Isabel. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her expression was still tense. "What was that?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "I don't know," Barron admitted, "but something tells me this isn't over." And while the ballroom tried to regain some semblance of normalcy, the real storm was only just beginning to gather. The ballroom remained in tense silence long after Captain Hargrove had been escorted out. Guests gripped their glasses a little tighter, their whispered conversations replaced by speculation. The elegant atmosphere had been shattered, leaving a sense of unease that not even the soft strains of the music could mask. Barron and Isabel stood near the entrance, watching as the evening tried to regain its rhythm. "We should go," Isabel said softly, her voice thick with concern. Barron nodded, his hand resting gently on the small of her back as he guided her toward the exit. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following them like a shadow. Isabel's grip on Barron's arm tightened, but he kept his expression calm and composed even as his mind raced. The hallways outside the ballroom were quieter, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound accompanying their footsteps. Isabel let out a shaky breath, her voice low but urgent. "Barron, what just happened? Why would he come after you like that?" "I don't know," Barron replied, his voice steady but his jaw tight. It felt personal, though. He wasn't just venting. "He's holding something in." Isabel frowned. "Maybe he's just unstable or drunk. Either way, this doesn't seem safe." Barron looked around the empty hallway, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "It's more than that. Did you hear what he said? About my family? That's not random." Isabel hesitated, her brow furrowed with concern. "Do you think he believes one of those conspiracy theories, the ones they spread online about your family?" "It wouldn't be the first time," Barron said bitterly. He paused, his gaze distant for a moment, but this felt different. He sounded certain, like he had some kind of personal grudge. When they reached their suite, Barron swiped his keycard and opened the door, holding it for Isabel. Once inside, the familiar luxury of their cabin did little to ease the tension in the air. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. Barron leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as he considered his options. "If I report this, it'll all be headline news." Barron Trump. Barron sat by the window, staring out at the vast expanse of ocean. His thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. What was Hargrove's endgame? Why had he chosen this moment, on this voyage, to make his move? When the moment arrived, Barron made his way to the captain's quarters, accompanied by two crew members who insisted on accompanying him. The narrow hallway leading to Hargrove's office felt colder, more oppressive. The sound of the ship's engines reverberated softly off the walls. "You don't have to do this," one of the crewmen said calmly as he reached the door. "Yes, I do," Barron replied with a resolute tone. The crew exchanged worried glances, but stepped back, allowing Barron to enter alone. The door opened, revealing Hargrove sitting behind a large mahogany desk. His uniform was neatly pressed, but his face showed signs of insomnia. His eyes, bloodshot and bleary, fixed on Barron as he entered. "You're brave, I'll give you that," Hargrove murmured, gesturing to the chair behind him. Barron sat down, his posture straight, his expression calm. "You wanted to see me. I'm here. Say what you need to say." For a moment, Hargrove simply stared at him, as if searching for something. Then he leaned back in his chair, letting out a sad smile. "You have no idea, do you? Spending your whole life working, sacrificing, only to have people like you walk all over it with a name." Barron cringed. "If this is about my family, it's always about my family." Hargrove cringed, slamming his hand on the table. "Do you know how many lives have been ruined because of them? Do you know what it's like to lose everything because someone in power decided you didn't matter?" "What do you mean?" Barron asked, his voice calm but firm. "If you have something to say, then say it. What did my family do to you?" Hargrove backed away, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. "It's not me," he said, his voice low. "Then it's for everyone who's been brought down by the weight of people like you. You think you're untouchable, that your name gives you the right to step on all of us? Well, not on my ship." Before Barron could respond, the intercom in the room rang. "Captain, we need you on the bridge immediately," a voice said, its tone urgent. Hargrove hesitated, his anger momentarily giving way to frustration. "This isn't over," he muttered, rising from his chair. Barron stood as well, his gaze steady. "No, it isn't over. But this isn't the right way to handle this, Captain. Whatever you think you're proving isn't going to work." Hargrove stepped away, but said nothing as he walked out of the room, leaving Barron alone. As Barron left the room, the crew members waiting outside looked at him expectantly. "What happened?" one of them asked. "He's furious," Barron said simply. "But this isn't just about me. He's harboring something bigger, something personal." But as the day wore on, it became clear that Hargrove's behavior was just the surface of a deeper, more dangerous storm brewing on the ship. The tension on the cruise ship shifted from laughter to speculation. By noon, it was clear that the previous night's events had become the talk of the ship. Passengers gathered in common areas, their conversations punctuated by furtive glances in Barron's direction or whispered theories about what had happened.